Now, the story of Poe Dameron actually begins before he was even born, with his parents who were both members of the Rebel Alliance and fought at the Battle of Endor, which, of course, was the fight that turned the tide of the Galactic War once and for all. In fact, Sergeant Kes Dameron, Poe's father, took part in the ground battle on Endor led by General Han Solo and was a member of the legendary Pathfinders unit, who you may have heard of since it was they who helped Jyn and Cassian infiltrate the Imperial base on Scarif to steal the Death Star plans as seen in Rogue One. And though we don't know for sure if Kes was there or not on Scarif, it's not impossible to think he did take part in that battle and managed to get off the planet after the shields fell and before the Death Star fired upon it. Poe's mother, on the other hand, was Lieutenant Shara Bay, a pilot and member of Green Squadron who flew in A-Wing during the attack on the second Death Star. In fact, she was actually one of the pilots who flew into the superstructure of the massive battle station, along with Lando and Wedge, who would eventually, of course, be the ones who knocked out the main reactor that ultimately destroyed the station. Shortly after that battle, Shara was recruited by none other than Luke Skywalker to assist him in a special mission to the planet Vatine, where they were to retrieve two fragments of a Force-sensitive tree, the one that once grew at the heart of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. After the mission was a success, Luke gave her one of the fragments and kept the other one for himself, likely eventually planting it at the new Jedi Temple, the one that was later destroyed by Kylo Ren and his Knights of Ren. Shara's fragment of the tree, however, was planted on Yavin 4, where she and Kes would settle down after the war ended, and also where Poe would be born. Now, starting at around the age of 4, Shara started to teach Poe how to fly in her old A-Wing, which no doubt begins to explain why Poe is such an exceptional pilot when we see him in The Force Awakens. However, it's also likely that growing up in the shadow of this Force tree, if you will, may have somehow made Poe Force sensitive to some degree, or even just blessed by the Force, not that that's an official thing, mind you. Still, I'd be surprised if that tree on Yavin 4 doesn't come back to be crucial at some point. Maybe not so much in the movies, but likely in some canon story down the road, especially if the one Luke had was indeed killed. Sadly for Poe though, his mother died when he was very young, but he did go on to follow in her footsteps in a sense, and became a squad leader in the New Republic's Defense Force. However, a few years before we see Poe in The Force Awakens, his squad caught the First Order stealing a ship, but the New Republic denied him permission to engage, due to a ceasefire between the First Order and the New Republic. Poe, however, who'd already been growing frustrated with the New Republic's failure to take the First Order threat seriously, disobeyed orders and tracked the ship to a First Order staging area before returning to base, which is when General Leia Organa immediately recruited him and the rest of his squad into her recently created resistance who were taking the First Order threat seriously. One of Poe's first missions for the Resistance, then, was to steal a New Republic senator's ship on suspicion of him being in league with the First Order, and when the First Order tried to stop him, Poe managed to escape with the ship, where Leia would eventually find information on board that the First Order was looking for two people, Lor San Tekka and Luke Skywalker, and once Leia knew this, she tasked Poe with finding Lor San Tekka and ultimately Luke, which he eventually of course does find Lor San Tekka, which is right where The Force Awakens picks up. Now, a lot of people like to think of Poe as the new Han Solo of this trilogy, and though there are certainly similarities there, with both being amazing pilots, one difference is Poe is described as being extremely loyal, and called a bad liar by those who know him best, and I'm not sure that's a description that fits Han, especially in his younger days. Sure, he was no doubt very loyal to Chewie when we first met him, and he became a responsible leader within the rebellion, but Han didn't start out that way, whereas Poe has, which really makes you wonder where they're going to take Poe's character as this story goes on. And as you may know, originally Poe was supposed to die in The Force Awakens when he and Finn crashed on Jakku, but J.J. Abrams changed the script and added him into the whole movie after discussing the character and the possibilities of said character with Oscar Isaac, who of course played Poe. And as much as I do like the character of Poe Dameron thus far, I do have some issues with him from The Force Awakens, which could either be seen as character flaws or story flaws. I guess that'll all depend on both your point of view and how they're going to use this character going forward. Because at the start of the movie, I do find it a little odd that he didn't flee with BB-8 into the desert after the First Order attacked and disabled his X-Wing, and then he went on to take a pot shot at Kylo Ren after Kylo killed Lor San Tekka, a guy Poe had met 5 minutes before and should have had no emotional attachment to, and one, not to sound heartless here, Poe should have been happy Kylo had just killed, because a dead Lor San Tekka wasn't going to tell Kylo Ren where the map was, or any other information pertinent to finding Luke Skywalker for that matter. Now sure, Poe getting himself captured like that could be seen as his way of buying time for BB-8 to escape, because Kylo now assumed he had the pilot Lor San Tekka had given the map to, and it was only a matter of time before he pulled the information from his mind on where the map was. But I'm still not sure that makes sense considering a free and alive Poe, even if the First Order searched for him, which they no doubt would have, had a better chance of getting the map back to the Resistance. Then again, maybe Poe realized if he did run blindly into the desert, there was a good chance he was going to die, whereas BB-8 at the worst would eventually just run out of power somewhere. However, I still think you take your chances of maybe dying of thirst or exposure to the elements, rather than let yourself be captured by the First Order. Another thing about Poe that I found a bit curious was how quickly he trusted Finn. I mean, think about it. Shortly after Poe has the information pulled from his mind by Kylo Ren that the map to Luke is in a BB unit, a First Order stormtrooper is willing to help him escape because, well, conveniently enough, he needs a pilot. That didn't seem at all fishy to Poe. Apparently not, because the first thing Poe wants to do with his new stormtrooper friend is go back to Jakku to find the BB-8 unit and the map, which really seems like a bad idea to me, because what if the moment they found BB-8, Finn just turned on Poe? Again though, there are a couple different ways to look at Poe's early choices in the movie. The first is that there are flaws in the story, though I'm not sure I even want to use the word flaws as much as things you just have to go along with or overlook, because The Force Awakens is roughly only 2 hours and 15 minutes long. Which means they can't spend too much of the movie on Finn convincing Poe that he won't betray him. It's just again something you're going to have to go along with. And honestly here, I like the fast friendship formed by these two. It showed Finn's longingness for some real type of friendship and acceptance, which, if you know Finn's backstory, is not something he gets out of the First Order. Now, should Poe have been skeptical of Finn on at least some level? Sure, but that takes us to another option here to explain Poe's actions. That being that he's just too trusting, and he relies way too much on his instincts or gut feelings, which could get him in trouble in one of these next two movies. Then again, maybe it's not a character flaw as much as it is a strength, that he can rely heavily on his instincts because, to some degree, he is Force sensitive or just more in tune with the Force than your average Joe, which again goes back to him growing up in the shadow of the Force tree on Yavin. One way or the other though, I'm very curious to see what they do with this character going forward, and how big of a role he'll play in the overall story, because I'm honestly not expecting him to have a big arc in this trilogy, because obviously this is going to be the Rey and Kylo Ren show, with Finn also being an important part of the story in his own right. And I just don't think that leaves much room or runtime for Poe, which is a shame because I do think he has a very interesting backstory, and is a character I hope continues to get explored further in the other sources of canon at the very least. Well, that's all I've got for you this time, and once again let me give thanks to my fiance, who you may know as Sailor Naboo, for helping me hunt down any and all information we have about Poe. And now it's your turn to tell me what you think about the character of Poe Dameron, how you interpreted his perhaps questionable actions in The Force Awakens, and how big of a role you think he'll play going forward. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.